My name is Donovan Scribes. We're here at the Black Gallery today, and I'm here meeting with Teressa Raiford and Glenn Waco. Teressa is the founder of Don't Shoot Portland and just an all-around activist, mentor to so many, and really have been at the forefront of the resistance movements here in Oregon, alongside Glenn, who has also worked with Don't Shoot Portland, a hip-hop artist that has helped push the scene forward. And I'm very happy to bring the two of y'all together to have this conversation about, where we came from in terms of Mike Brown, all the way up to George Floyd and where we are 5 years later. So thank y'all for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right, so first off, I just wanted to start this conversation by asking you, Teressa, we all grew up in a Portland that looked much different than it does today. And then in particular, Northeast Portland looks much different than it did even 5-10 years ago. So when you think about the Northeast Portland that you came up in, what comes to mind?
Generations of displacement. I mean, you just said it. Every couple of decades, we're looking at a new renewal, but it's also a Negro removal, like James Baldwin said. And I guess that's what they call progressive in our city, the City of Roses, when we move people away or move them out of town, rather than let them stay there and develop the roots that it takes to build a successful community. We call that progress. So it's pretty, usual and customary around here.
And then for you, Glenn, like St. John's is a part of Portland, but a lot of people from the north almost rep it like it's a hometown, like it's kind of a separate thing. So it's kind of inside, outside at the same time. So can you talk about what gives the north that kind of perspective on the city?
Absolutely. When it comes to the north, it always operated like a village. Like we always, like everyone knows somebody that knows somebody that's related to somebody that knows somebody. So it's just like we came up together super tight. So when you have like death in the city or something traumatic happen in the city, that affects a core of people like of the city a lot, because everybody kind of know each other. So there was a time where, even though I grew up in the north and St. John's and all that, there was a time I kind of like kept away because like I kind of wanted to preserve my memory of that, what it was, because I kind of, once you see 7-Elevens pop up, that's like the precursor to gentrification. So we start seeing that around that time, and like it got a facelift, you know what I'm saying? But that memory and that, that spirit of what the North is, that's always like the people that grew up there, it's always in us. Like it don't matter what side of the city you in now or what gang you from or what family, like we from the North. So that's the core of the identity right there.
And so, Northeast and North Portland. North Portland is a little bit different because it's more cultures that were kind of inherently there, but still it's like black hubs for Portland. So just one word that comes to mind when y'all think of Black Portland.
Shoot, my grandma, I think about her generation and them coming here for those jobs at the shipyards, and how this area right here was just filled with black people, this Northwest Portland where we are right now. And this used to be the community of the black people in our town. When I grew up, in the 70s, my uncles all worked down here, houses on 23rd, black people lived in them. Still, and obviously now it looks a whole lot different. Even the businesses that are here that took place over the warehouses where a lot of jobs were, I think about the elders that got here and what they had to go through just for us to exist in this space today. Somebody was asking me the other day, how did I feel about like all the protests, everything that's going on? And I said, well, shoot, from what I'm seeing now today, our very existence is resistance. The fact that we're still here, the fact that we're still alive, the fact that we still hope to thrive, that's literal resistance because of how we've been treated.
Absolutely. Glenn, anything you would add to that?
One word that defines Black Portland, I think distracted. I think that a lot of, again, the things that have happened have kind of got us as a community distracted with one another, and I think our eye is kind of off the ball and we're too into it with each other. What I mean by that is like we know what's going on like politically and all that, but as far as like in the community, like the lack of social infrastructure, there's a reason for why that's happening. The lack of like why, you know, gentrification is happening. That's the lack of like financial literacy, understanding like, you know, when people sold their homes and just how corporations and politics. I mean, I just think that if we were engaged with decision-making rooms and seats, a lot would be different. So I think distracted is a perfect way to describe us. I think if we weren't so distracted, a lot of things would be different.
Yeah.
But I want to say something about that. When you're traumatized and somewhat oppressed, discriminated against, and to the focus of being terrorized, like right now, everyone are on the same page. They're like, this is terroristic. The way that we're looking at things be changed, all these executive orders. This has been how we've been living in this country the whole time. And so it's hard to focus when there's terror at every door, when your kids can't go outside, you can't go to work, you can't live where you want to live, you can't learn what you want to learn. The distraction, the trauma, and the triggers from that treatment as a person in a place where, you know, we're standing up for our liberties, we're paying into a tax system that's supposed to give us a return on investment. When it doesn't come, it's not just distraction, it's trauma. And I think that the level of trauma that we've had to endure, not only following up with the memories of our grandparents, like a lot of us in Portland, we were raised, when Black people came to Portland in the 20s, 30s, and even before that, they were having 10, 15 kids. So a lot of people here are related. When we talk about the Johnsons and the Paytons and the, you know, all the different Wares and, you know, the Sims and all these different people, they've been here for generations on generations on generations. And we've all been a part of that memory of trauma and discrimination. And so we get to where we are now in 2025 and the whole world is recognizing that. And now we get to breathe. Now we can say, so now everybody understands where we're at, but what does that mean for us? Like, is that gonna lessen the distraction? Is that gonna lessen the trauma just now because everybody is now a witness to it? Or, you know, like what Dr. King said in his last book, and you know, Glenn was born on his birthday, but it's like, where do we go from here? Like now we are all on the same page. I'm hoping that we're getting there, but you know, I think it's a lot more than just a distraction. I think there's been these insistent barriers to our livability here.
Yeah.
100%.
And just like you said, like we're in Northwest Portland right now. A lot of people don't necessarily associate Black Portland with Northwest Portland, but this is where we were, and then got forced further across the river,
Yeah.
you know, Albina, lower Albina, then you get forced even further up. And then, of course, you got Vanport around the same time,
Yeah.
but when Vanport floods, then you're pushing everybody together,
Yeah.
you know, and then we build community wherever we are, but then they come in on Northeast Portland and North Portland, and they start putting the crunch on Northeast
And then
Portland.
at the same time, you're divesting from social infrastructure. So again, the benefits and the resources that the community could use to fix some of our issues, it gets put in. Like, what's the difference between affluent communities and, you know, people in poverty? Those type of communities, it's resources. You know, it's the reason why police don't patrol over there. It's not because they're less criminal or whatever. It's just you're criminalizing an identity and group of people over here. So of course, if you embed that algorithm over here, that's what it's gonna be. If that's all people know, that's all what they're gonna do.
And there's like in our state and really in our city, like when my nephew got murdered in 2010, there was this insistence that every agency follow the protocol of identifying the problem in our community, but they were only looking at Black and brown people. And so you got TriMed, you got the health department, you got the schools, you got the local businesses, you know, you got the Boys and Girls Club, you got the police, you got everybody focused on the people that we call marginalized or, you know, at risk as a way to like make them stay in line, or like it's too much focus. We're not distracted.
I mean, it's a
But, you
trigger
know,
word
like,
though.
it's-
Like that. Like we've gone through this. Like it's a
like
trigger
there
word
ain't no
for funding.
escaping that.
Like they're not really looking to address the situation because you get paid for addressing the situation, but not really addressing the situation. It's
part.
perpetual. So those are words that mean really whatever you throw onto words. That word will probably mean something different 10 years from now. They can always shake up the play, but it's the same playbook.
Yeah.
I mean, as far as us, we need to get hip onto that and again get in these decision-making rooms and these decision-making seats and go beyond voting and actually take up some seats. Because as far as people want to be scared about Trump and MAGA and all that, neoliberals enable fascism. If people forgot, we went through this under Obama.
We did, and remember, we was in the rooms and we was at the tables and we was sitting in the committees and we were providing the testimony and getting the community there, and they would have the police show up and make it seem like we were violent or we out of line. And that right there, again, if I was focused and ready to do something, if every time I show up, I see, the squad, the riot trucks, the people in their guns and stuff, and I know that they've never been in these spaces before. There's people that's showing up like, oh, wow, what's going on? And then they looking at us immediately like, oh, the police here for y'all?
Yeah,
and we just
that.
literally here with our kids trying to provide testimony about the lead in the water. We're not here to fight the police or be attacked, but that's the feeling and the movement that's happening. And so again, it's hard to say, let's bend the infrastructure and make ourselves included when the state and the obvious need to have authority over us is stronger than the value that they should have for us as people, like your thoughts about me overrule your focus about what you should be doing for me or with me.
And that bleeds into the policy decisions, of course.
It's always
and,
there.
and what you're talking about in terms of like kind of criminalizing the community and targeting the community, it's like, obviously crime exists in our community just like it exists in every community, but the amount of focus on it is like alarm bells, and it's on our news every night, and it's told to us over and over and over again through messaging. And then on top of that, it's like when you try and stand up for yourself and stand up for the community, that's criminalized too. Was doing this.
And from my perspective, that's an algorithm, that's a narrative. It sells, it's marketing, but is it true? We never get to the why. Well, a lot of people get to the why, but they don't want to hear the why. Because if you actually applied to the why, that would take money, that would take policy, and that would take you actually applying action towards empathy. But when it comes to neoliberals, they have pretty words, but when it comes to rubber meets the road, they're giving funding to the other side, you know what I'm saying? And not working class people, not people that experience abject, poverty. And it's a game. When people say two wings of the same bird, I believe that neoliberals are, they're going to pacify you to death, and Republicans have migrated to just straight up authoritarianism. So, I mean, in that system, it's hard to navigate, but we have to address both sides. It's not just MAGA,
Right. I want to take it back for just a second to, Northeast and just kind of our relationship to police. And so, most people in Portland, especially Northeast Portland, know about the possum incident. That's all you got to say is those two words. People know what that is. But I know you've been asked about the possum incident a lot. But one thing that even just kind of leading into this interview, I thought for the first time was like, you were a kid when that happened, so what do you remember about that in that moment? And then how did that change for you? How did your views on that moment change as you became an adult? And then if you want to give some ground setting too about what the possum incident actually is, just for people who are watching.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So on March 13th, 1981, 7 police officers or 7 cars of police rolled up to my grandmother's restaurant, which was called the Burger Barn on Martin Luther King, which was at the time Union Avenue. And they, discarded some carcasses of possums that they had shot in the city. They threw them on the steps of the restaurant and, jumped back into their squad cars and rode downtown. And when they did that, you have to open the door, to get out the restaurant. So these possums were taking up space in front of our business. And, people felt like it was a problem. My grandpa was really good friends with the police commissioner at the time, which was Charles Jordan. So he gets on the phone and calls him and says, hey, man, some of your people just got through, some of your officers, because Charles Jordan was the black police commissioner. He was the first black and I think the last black police commissioner that we had in the city of Portland. And he was supposed to be the mayor after that. They were going to, he did Pioneer Square, he did the waterfront park, he did the revitalization of our parks programs throughout the city, a lot of work for our town. But yeah, he's heard that the possums got thrown out of the squad cars. So when the officers got down to the police station, all he had to do was go outside and look in the back of the car, and on the mats there was blood. So it was obvious that it actually happened. And, he kind of put them on leave and started this whole investigation. And the entire city of Portland police department went on strike. They literally stopped going to work, protested against the community because they didn't want accountability. And what ended up happening was there were lots of organized movement work. It was Ron Herndon, Mr. Broussard, all kinds of people from our community got together to speak about the open racism that was happening to businesses. In March, that's only 3 months into the year. When that incident happened, there had already been over 500 complaints about racial intimidation and harassment by police officers in Portland. And so when I came home, after taking time off and started getting active, what I did was I found this videotape that my uncle had recorded, an hour and 44 minutes of news broadcast from the possum incident. And it showed all of these different views and ideas and thoughts that people were sharing openly in the media, and documenting just their experiences. And that kind of turned me into like a researcher. I wanted to find out more information because I was like, well, dang, I remember when the possum attack happened, and I remember that people were upset about the possums being murdered. But outside of my grandma being sad, I didn't know that people cared about it like that because, it got quiet real quick because you gotta be cool. The people you speak too loud, they might get mad at you. And what I learned in my research is that the groups that were organizing against the violence that was happening with the police started fighting each other because of all their different biases and because of the, at the time we didn't know about COINTELPRO, but you had all these different things that were triggering these eruptions of people organizing and really building a front against violence and racism here in our city. And that just kind of stood with me. Like after my nephew got killed in 2010, I went back to all of that because I was thinking to myself, like, how do you convince our community that we actually do have the power to build leverage for the safety of our children? We actually do have power to have political access. We do have power to get the best education that we want outside of like a hustle of equity, because there was a lot of what I'll call racketeering because I had to do all these audits that were happening in regards to our education system and everything else. But I wanted to convince our community that no matter what you saw in media, no matter what you thought was going to happen because of whoever was elected, that our power, our understanding, our experience, and our memory is the situation that needs to be on the record. That's what needed to be recorded. That was what you need to use for leverage. I feel like when we find information like the possum videos and then all the articles and all the letters to Charles Jordan, that to me is evidence of a system that allowed that type of violence to happen and didn't have any kind of safety nets to stop it, and still don't to this day. And so when you look at the vigilante justice that was happening with like the Proud Boys when they were here in Portland before they went worldwide, and we platformed them here in Portland, like we platform hate, but we don't platform, the movement against hate. And so it continues to perpetuate because it's invested in. I don't know how to explain it. It's incredible.
I mean, 500 incidents, before that is incredible. I never heard that.
Kathy Kim Moore, I got the video. She was like, it's been over 500 incidents. I'm looking at the news because it's, 1981. You got commercials and everything. Incredible. Even the way that they were talking about the situation, incredible.
I was doing some research in 2020 just about the past and how the cops had shown up. And Dr. Karen Gibson, she has this paper, Black and Blue. Yeah, and that was the first time I saw this stat that in the late 60s, Portland police had almost 50% of their arrests were Black people. And, we only been a little bit of the city this whole time. So just the fact and that's what's on record from them.
Yep.
So that doesn't include any assaults or any stops or any all the things that aren't on record.
They thought they were doing good work. They were getting money for all these arrests and all these detains. When you detain, it's like when you get a grant. If you don't use it, you lose it. And so we were literally the funding mechanism for most of the state from the time when they had the poor farms, and they would legitimately say, oh, if you're disabled, or if you have idle time, or if you're black, or if you're an indigenous person and you don't have your parents here, and we'll put you on the poor farm and you'll never be heard from again. And that was a priority because they had housing, they had medical support, they had all these things that contributed to their livelihood. And once the poor farms went away because of the abuse and the mass graves and things like that, they moved it into, yeah, you was farming and they were selling the food to local businesses. And the thing is that you were supposed to be disabled. Why would you put me here and you got me working till I die and then throwing me in the grave with 10 other people? And that's why I work with the archivists. They got all these maps and everything. It was the zoo and McMinnville and just these different places. McMinimans is on where one of the poor farms was. The Edgefield was a poor farm. They literally had people there.
That was the 60s, you said, or what? How long ago was that?
No, this is like the 40s, 30s. This was literally the foundation.
They weren't allowed to own any property though, or anything, right?
You literally was lucky that they didn't just let you die. You live there until you die, and they'll work you till you die. You have a job while you're there. The people that were running it were literally running it like it was a plantation. There's a whole video. My friend Terry Baxter, who's a Multnomah County archivist, he did a show on OPB, and it has like all the Oregon poor farms. Is incredible. But yeah, it details everything. And when I looked at that information, and then I looked at what happened in the 80s with the possum incident, and then I looked at what's happening now with like gang task force and all that, it's like, oh, we found another funding mechanism for dealing with this Negro problem. We trying to remove them, and we're trying to make it, make sense. We don't want them here. We don't want them to buy houses. If they're over the age of 25, they're supposed to be out of here or we can whip them. But once all that was delegitimized, it became community policing. And how does that work? And who's going to teach them, and who's going to provide services for them, and how do we get them to, become that mechanism of support? You get federal aid for people that are, disabled or black because they thought it was the same thing. You just had idle time, which means if you're not working for me or anybody, or we collectively said we don't want you to work and we're not providing you a job, we're still going to make money off of you. And so it's extremely, it's useful and it works, because when you look at the overrepresentation of children in our foster care system, you look at the overrepresentation of parents and adults and even children in juvenile justice system, all of that is systemic, because we're less than 3 to 5% of the population, but we do make up, far more greater numbers and percentages of the population in those incarcerated places, and especially like in foster care. I grew up in foster care. Most of the people in my generation whose families champion, the civil rights movement, those children from the traumatized families ended up, all over the community. And that's how a lot of us even know each other, living in each other's houses, moving from neighborhood to neighborhood. It wasn't just, oh, we grew up on the same block. We grew up everywhere because of the displacement.
One of the things that, as I've gotten older, that has been more clear to me is that people take time as like evidence of change, like progress or progressiveness. And then you look at something like Tony Lloyd Stevenson getting killed not that long after the possum incident.
Yeah.
And we're definitely gonna get to George Floyd, but like one of the things that bugs me is like his death was like so similar in a lot of ways to George Floyd, and just getting choked out.
That was the 90s or 80s?
That was 83.
That was 80, yeah.
Yeah.
83, yeah.
I don't know if you would have been
I was
kid
13.
still,
I
or
was still a kid.
Yeah.
I was 11 when the possum incident. Well, I turned 11 that year. And that is funny because at the time that happened, I was the class president at King. I was 5th grade, class president, we cool. And then all of a sudden this happens, and it's like, oh, wow, like, what does this mean? I remember, like, we were all like, whoa, wait a minute, we go to King school. We got black presidents, like we got people with businesses and stuff. What do you mean the police want to, hurt my family? What do you mean? And it was a trip because everybody knows about the possum incident. But before the possums, the KKK, they used to have these little business cards, and they would drop their business card off along with like dead chickens on my grandma's restaurant. They used to do that all the time, all kinds of little dead animals that they would drop off, but they'd have their card along with it. So by the time the police did it, it was just like, that was outrageous. It was like, wait a minute, we calling y'all for help, and all of a sudden y'all doing it. And they were like, no, it was a prank. And it wasn't a prank. You know, it's terroristic action.
That's the connection right there. You said they used to tie dead chickens to their cars, and then the police wound up doing it. Like, obviously, like, the police used to meet with the mayor, or the KKK used to meet with the mayors and city councils back in, what is that, 20s?
In 20s, yeah.
Yeah, it's pictures on about that. So it's like, it's in the
Well,
system.
we had Nazis marching at the Rose Festival. Come on. So, I mean, with the KKK and all this stuff, we know that this was a white settlement and that it wasn't supposed to secure futures for Black people. We know that in the 40s and even up to the 60s, the fact that they didn't want people to own property or to actually live here and raise their kids was because they were like, wait a minute, y'all not supposed to be here. This is a whites-only place. You're supposed to come here and help us build bridges and railroads and homes, but you're not supposed to homestead here. And so I think when we talk about that timeline from, you know, the 40s to the 60s to the 80s till now, that community policing was the same as the removal. It was like, okay, how do we tolerate? And you think about that, tolerate. How do we tolerate them being here? How do we make it functional for us? And one of the things I realized when I started protesting after my nephew's death and just really wanting to was because I was like, oh, y'all have learned how, my community has learned how to tolerate racism. We've learned how to tolerate bigots and white supremacists. That's the problem. You know what I'm saying? We're figuring out ways to survive this violence, and we've allowed ourselves to tolerate it. And we've allowed people to say, well, maybe if you just didn't talk so much, and if you wasn't so loud, so ghetto, so rude, you know, I'm just saying hi. But you looking me in my face, you scaring my kids, you know. You guys talking loud, you playing your music at the park.
Maybe if you pull up your pants like they didn't assassinate Martin Luther King and Malcolm in suits and ties.
Exactly.
Like, they wasn't beating people in suits and ties. Like, that doesn't matter.
Yeah, it does not matter.
It doesn't matter.
It's like, you know.
Same energy.
So I'm gonna fast forward us a little bit. Just you talked about your nephew a little bit, but can you say more about how he helped lead you into stepping into activism a little bit more?
Oh yeah. Well, obviously, you know, I was raised here. I raised my children here for a little time, but and I believe it was 2007. My cousin Deontay got killed right after my grandmother died. And I got out of here. I got out of here with my kids, and I was like, I'm not gonna let them think this is normal, because what had happened up until that time, so many of my friends and relatives and people I knew were dying, and there weren't any investigations. It was supposed to be black on black crime or gangs, all this stuff that just popped up as soon as funding came with it, right? We had crack, and then we had people talking about the crack on TV, and then the next thing I know, everybody was shooting, and we had people coming in from out of town that were gang members and informants, and it kind of like wrecked our whole community because people didn't know who to trust. And you add death on top of that. And so there's this disenfranchisement, but there's also like deregulated community members, people that had for generations been friends, people who were related because of the 10 and 15 kids and, you know, the small population of intergenerational organizing and people just living. It became like a big old wall between us. You had like the haves and have-nots. It was like people were pointing the finger at each other, and we weren't looking at systemic issues that were happening that were driving this violence.
You said, hold on, that timeline is important. You said the possum incident happened in 1981. Mm-hmm. Tony happened in 1983. Crack hit in 84. And then you got the funding coming to destabilize it. So it's like people got to pay attention to that right there, even in that right there.
And then all the gang injunctions and stuff are the 90s.
Yeah.
You know.
And then that followed that. So it's like it's funding, it's pimping trauma, it's distractions, it's all of that.
Yeah. And it's funny because when I first came home, I had been working for a CPA in Texas for 15 years. So I saw it as racketeering. I was like, oh, wait a minute. Y'all making money off of dead children? Like, what's going on here? And everybody's in on this. like, what is this? And that's where like the protests and the audits came in, because it's like, why are y'all demanding audits? Because we want to see how you came to this realization that black people were so dangerous that you had to use all these millions of dollars and all these city bureaucratic mechanisms to survey us, like to criminalize us, because the criminalization is more violent than a child walking down the street with their pants down, or denying somebody to go in their backpack at the bus stop. Like, you're killing children for not allowing you to violate their civil liberties. And everyone that was sitting around the table was like, well, they should have did what they told them to do. That was the problem. That's when I realized there was a problem after my nephew's death. I was like, oh, it's not just the kids being mad at each other. It's not just this inherent violence that exists in places where there's poverty. It is a systemic mechanism for funding. We're not spending money on education and housing, jobs. We're spending money on funerals, and police, yeah.
Bullets rather than books. Like, that's what they siphon the money out of. They siphon the money from books to buy bullets. Remember police union practice?
Yeah, I did the audits. I saw even in our school system, one of the reasons that they had to deal with the equity problem was because it was more of a mechanism of surveillance and interrogation, investigation. It was like children waiving their FERPA rights, which a FERPA is your Federal Education Right to Privacy Act. It's supposed to protect your rights when you're in schools. In our communities where it was predominantly black and brown children, they had FERPA waivers on your Sun School program. So if you wanted to go to an after-school program, you're waiving your right to privacy. So rather than these agencies having to do like a subpoena or, information request, you're giving them access to your health information, your HIPAA. You're giving them access to anyone that's in your family, because I can't give you a free lunch unless I know who's in your household. And you might not write it down, but when you sign that child up and you waive that FERPA right, we now have the right as an agency to ask teachers and healthcare providers and even the bus driver, is that kid okay? You think anything might be wrong with him? I remember one time when your sisters had, there was something going on in the apartments, and they had been like, hey, the police is at the door, and was like, don't answer the door. The police did a referral to CPS because the kids didn't want to answer the door without their parents there. And so you got a whole nother mechanism. You got kids at school that are hungry and they get a referral to CPS. And this is before we had the food for the backpacks in the schools. They just say, oh, the kid is hungry. That means the parents are neglecting them. Let's go ahead and just do the referral. Well, you're wondering why you got overrepresentation in foster care and why those children in foster care are being abused. Like, the mechanisms that we were using to help were harming. They created more harm. And that's what created the protest.
It's so crazy. It's like everything she's explaining, people will interpret that logic as that's just a product of nature. No, that is a product of policy, priority, and funding. The same funding that's going towards those type of mechanisms that's criminalizing and targeting these kids and these families could be used for resources and programs and structure so they don't go hungry. But the priority isn't there.
And we could not be racist and allow people to live where they want to live and go to school and get jobs. Like, there literally were barriers to that based on your behavior. I even realized in my audits and in my activism that there was this whole community vetting system. Like, you could go into a space and you could have legitimate reason to be there, and you could communicate whatever your issue is. And if you weren't vetted, no one there would take you seriously. People would close you out at sight, like, oh, don't listen to this person. And the vetting kept the system safe. It kept it safe from accountability. And that vetting happened on both sides. It was black people and white people vetting out voices of distress.
Distress and dissent.
Dissent, that's the word. I was like, where's that word at? Dissent. If you said there was a problem about any of the things, gentrification, he's just over here. Yeah, you should have went to school and did your thing. And it's like, come on, man, you really think that the people that we call vulnerable and at risk and marginalized are the problem? When we have the system that works against their humanity?
And then within that system, I got to touch on this. Within all of that, what's going on, you have pastors at funerals being like prioritizing and telling kids they ain't scared to shoot them rather than providing solutions for these kids at a funeral of gun violence. Like, that's been going on a lot too.
Yeah,
and that needs to be checked because it's like, what are we doing? Like, why is that the messaging to your children? That's your children.
Well, we talked about the informant culture here in our city, so it ain't too far-fetched. And you look at crime bill and how it was set up. It wasn't set up for investments in our community. It was literally set up for investigation, surveillance, you know, the things, those mechanisms for incarceration. And it works the way that it was set up to work, and it continues to work today. But I'm just, again, because of what's happening with Donald Trump and what's happening in the world with his fascist, you know, regime and Project 2025 and all this other stuff, people are just now seeing what we've been saying, because it is definitely happening now. And it's not just happening, it's already been occurring, but now it gets to happen to whoever they want to release the system onto. It's already set up. They don't have to create something to create these barriers to our life. They already exist. Now they're just illuminated because now they're going to be existing in front of a lot of people.
And some of those mechanisms, as far as people want to say Republicans, some of that stuff was set up by neoliberals right before Trump. So it's like, they know what they're doing. Look how back up.
So in terms of seeing what we've been saying, 2014, that's when Mike Brown gets killed in Ferguson, and that's when Don't Shoot also forms.
Yeah, Don't Shoot. Yeah, because
Yeah,
we had already been organizing, but people were like, you got to do something. Y'all need to do something. I was like, what are we going to do? Like, I didn't want to protest. I was like, that's not going to do anything. Why are we going to be protesting? They was like, well, shoot, you know, somebody has to say there's a problem. And when I realized that not only could we organize people to show up, but we can get those people to go to City Hall. We could get them to go to the state capitol. We could go to Multnomah County. They would go to their school board. When we realized that we could help people learn how to assert their experience and put it into 90 seconds or 3 minutes or whatever the testimony amount of time was, that's when I felt that functioning as an activist made sense. But just the protest didn't make sense. But if we were protesting in a way that we deliberately broke these systems of inequity, then that was worth the time and effort that it would take. But I knew that we had to kind of educate people on what was going on. And I think like what me and Glenn are doing now, talking and discussing our thoughts about things, that was one of the first things we started doing as community. We'd say, okay, what's everybody's background? Why are you here? And then based on that, that's your thing. Like, let's go ahead. We got the intersections. Now let's go out here and, you know, get on these streets. And everybody from wherever they were got to participate. So if you're a teacher, what's happening in the school system that needs to be addressed? Let's go ahead and organize with these parents and get them educated. Let's listen to these children and get their testimonies on the record. Let's go to the school board, put it on the record again so that we can make sure that they change it. We're not just going to use Facebook to say that we're mad about it. We're going in here and we're going to remove the superintendent, and we did. You know what I'm saying? We're going to shut down these schools that don't, you know, serve us or don't have safe water, and we did. You know, we're going to get $700 million in funding to reconstruct. Oh, we did, and they put it on the schools where they was going to do it anyway, but they did it on our backs, but we made it happen. And so showing people just that little level of opportunity, like, look, when you show up and you say something on the record and you understand what you're saying and you know bureaucracy, you're moving this needle. Up until then, like Glenn said, we had been relying on our elected officials. We were like, oh, this person's we just elected them. They stand for our values. They're going to do it. They can't do it by themselves. They won't do it by themselves. That position is very comfortable to be in. You know that you have a lot of leverage. But if the people aren't there willing to speak to the issues on the record directly on your behalf or with your hosting, then it's not going to work. It doesn't matter who you elect. If you don't have the courage or the time or the energy to share what you understand to the record, democracy isn't going to work.
Period.
And you said kind of having people identify what their thing is. And so Glenn, around that same time, you had just released your first album, Northbound. And I know Teressa was part of how you ended up in the streets, or maybe the reason you ended up in the streets.
I remember that day. Like,
So,
not like
You didn't go to work that day.
Yeah.
okay, talk about that first time that you went out there.
Yeah, man. I was just seeing like everybody. Like I was just at work, at home, wherever I was at, just seeing what was going on with police brutality and Mike Brown and just like everything. It was a day where he got acquitted. Where
November.
Darren got where he got acquitted, and then it's like, you know what? I'm gonna quit myself from my job. I'm about to go out here and do something. I quit my job. I knew that Teressa was having something downtown, and I went downtown searching for him, and just lo and behold, ran into Mac, you know, and then we went or whatever, and then that day she handed me a bullhorn, and I just stuck by her side ever since. It was Don't Shoot Portland ever since. So that's what it was.
I feel like you put a bullhorn in a few people's
Oh
hands.
yeah, because I don't
Hey,
like.
the passing of the bullhorn is like a rite of
That's
passage.
it
Like she did it to
is.
me, I've done it to a few people. It's
You
kind of a
gotta
rite of
give them the
passage.
horn. I remember one time Jesse was like, "Hey, get the horn from that pool. What are you
Yeah,
doing?"
yeah.
I'm like, "Well, free speech." Like everybody got to speak. There was like, "Not him." I was like,
Yeah,
"Okay."
yeah,
I didn't
yeah.
know Fash was showing up to our protest. I wanted everybody to speak. Like if we would learn something from you, maybe we could help you because you probably just lost.
But as you see, there's a theme of like education before action. It's not just we just out there. Like there was methods to things. So
So for you, being a musician, like your music already was speaking to the struggle and what was going on, not just in Northport, but just like what's going on for Black folks. And so, how did your view on music as a tool for activism change when you started being in the streets protesting?
I mean, it's a form of communication. Whether you rapping it, whether you got a bullhorn in your hand or whatever, it's a message. You know what I'm saying? My favorite rappers all got like are all storytellers and active, like Tupac, Lupe Fiasco, Nas. I could just go down the list, and it's all people that actually talk about something. And I felt like, okay, we could talk about it all day, but you could actually like get the experience and be right there and understand better from a song or YouTube or whatever. I'm right there. I'm seeing what they saying, how they lying, what they lying about, how these systems work. Okay, I can apply that. I may not understand anything right now, but I'm gonna get this experience and apply it when it's time to. So I just thought that that was just logical to me.
Yeah. He got a lot of people to start speaking out because it's one thing to hear somebody like myself saying, "Hey, the system is broken and we need audits," and it's another thing to have an artist interpret what they're feeling in this moment. And those feelings, if we, I mean, we're in the art gallery right now, and this is the, the inheritance of Don't Shoot Portland is connecting the art to the community. But those voices, those statements, those feelings, they go further than, my protest chant. I could say hands up, don't shoot all day. But when he drops a verse that's connecting to the humanity or to the loss or to the community, that takes it further. That connects to somebody, and then they start responding. We do this call and response. They used to do battle rap, but it gets everybody to grab their pen and write something down. It makes somebody want to make more art. They might not feel like they're a rapper, but oh, now I'm a poet. I remember after that first week, it was like we had the bullhorn, and everybody was up there like, okay, I got my paper, and I was like, oh shoot, I feel like I'm in the studio again. Because when we lived in Texas and I used to do CPA work, most of our artists, most of our clients were rappers or musicians or people that own, concert venues and stuff like that. So it was funny to see somebody with the phone reading lyrics and doing poetry at a protest where we're fighting for our lives. We're not there for entertainment purposes at all. But the thing that stunned the crowd and got them to connect was when we started speaking into the mic in a way that really just started that.
And again, these wasn't just flowery poems. It was messaging in the poems about what we was experiencing right now, thoughts or whatever. Like people like had their thoughts about what we should do or whatever. Again, music, art is a form of communication. And to have people on that wavelength, no matter whether you was whatever identity you identified as, that algorithm right there brought everybody together in that moment. That's what's important because they'll use every type of mechanism they can to divide, distract, and us with each other. But when we tune that out and that messaging is in alignment, it's nothing they can do.
So you're talking about or music specifically, but like you said, Don't Shoot has been rooted in art as well. Like it's part of
music, not just music.
right.
Yeah,
That's
art,
it's just
period.
like art period, whether it's visual art, music or otherwise. Why do you think art is so important to movement building?
Well, when I lived in Texas and I was running my company, and my nephew Andre would contact me and talk to me about what was happening here in Portland before he died, before I came home, and he died while I was here. it was always about, oh, my friend want to be a rapper. My friend, he knew I was working with these artists and we were doing these global tours and stuff. So he was like, I got a friend that know how to rap, Auntie. I got somebody that know how to do this. And so when I lost him, all I was thinking about was like, where are all these kids that he was talking about? Where are all his friends that have this artistic endeavor? Because I work with an accountant. I could set them up with companies. I could help them get funds. And what I've started learning and just wanting to do that is that there were all these resources out here, but if you weren't already entrenched in the system, if you weren't like at risk, you didn't have access to them, or if you weren't in jail, you didn't have access to them. And I was like, why are all the
Imagine if
resources
they had access
here?
to the resources before
Yeah,
they
it was
got.
like, why do they got all the resources for you when you get locked up or incarcerated or in the system? Why don't I have them now? Because we're artists. That's our inheritance. You can make a piece of art on a $10 piece of canvas and sell it for 800 to 1,000 to 15. You know, there's expensive art in the world that comes from trauma and the expression of that. And so if I, as a community organizer, I'm watching the families that I'm activating with and that are coming to me for advocacy, and I was looking at their kids. And every time I see the kids, I'd be like, oh, shoot, let me give them something to play with. Let me do this. I even made business cards that look like a cell phone, an Apple phone with apps on it and stuff, because I figured if I'm hanging out with a kid and they talking about things and ideas that they have, I could show them how their goals could become a reality. Like, you could be 15 years old and be a millionaire selling bow ties. You could sell socks. You could make art. You could do this. Like, let me show you, because I'm working with people that are creating companies and doing this real. And I know that it's not rocket science. It's your expression and who you are. And no better time than to use your expression when you have trauma and there's things that you want to say. And so making art available to people was the essential need. It was like, I'm not doing this unless I can give you something. And what can I give you that's going to give you a return on investment? I can give you hope. Here's some canvas. Here's some paint. Here's some studio time. You know, like, what else do we have to do? Now we have an art gallery. We got a Black cultural library over there. We do archives. Like, we're doing things to document even our expressions in art so that we can have a place to land with our trauma and not have to take it with us everywhere we go, because we're no longer tolerating that. So it's time to kind of like
Filter that.
yeah,
into action.
it's time to build better, you know,
Yeah. And
for ourselves.
all of that, you know, all that pouring into the community off of just the strength of that, I mean, that empowered people. I mean, not just, you know, to do art and all of that, like just legal president, like people
I got
became
arrested
lawyers
at an
and
art
students,
project.
and people won lawsuits against the police. Like, it's like we
Yeah, well,
really empower people. So that was dope to see. You know?
Yeah, like even when we filed the lawsuits against Donald Trump and Ted Wheeler in 2020 for the use of tear gas and everything, obviously it was an organization filing a lawsuit for violence that was happening. And we literally were like, oh yeah, we had like 1,000 posters out there. We were giving away t-shirts. And when you expense that tear gas that you were part of that report on, you were damaging the art. Because we know you don't care about killing us. You know, we know you don't care about our safety and our health, but you're messing up like the environment and the art.
The water, the water, like,
the soil.
Even if I was, because I was, you know, I just had got my niece. I wasn't physically
One
out
of
there,
them pulled
but
a
the influence
sign.
and the influence and the energy, the presence was felt because we were doing things like that behind the scenes. We were, you know, putting that into tangible action. And, you know, the tear gas and the water thing, that's going to affect more people than just in a day. That's in our drinking water. Mm-hmm. You know, those chemicals are long
Near the
lasting.
schools and everything else. Like,
So we're having a budget dispute. We're having terrorists come across the waters over here over our city's budget dispute. And as a response to that, you guys are tear gassing everybody, and that's bleeding into the water over a budget dispute. What are we doing? That's the part people need to pay attention to.
I want to back us up real quick because y'all are talking about 2020, but
oh, it came up.
no, I mean it's going to, you know. So when I was kind of preparing for this interview, I was looking back at when you and Marcus were out there for last Thursday, and a kid had gotten hit during last Thursday. You and Marcus tried to help him out, and then that became a whole thing. But what tripped me out is the 10-year anniversary for that is actually just days away from the 5-year anniversary of George Floyd. So that happened on May 28th, 2015 with y'all. George Floyd, May 25th, 2020. And so just,
George Soros didn't fund that.
And-
Just for the record, like
can you talk a little bit about that moment at last Thursday, and maybe even just how, as you were stepping out to be more active around,
Providing first aid to somebody that got shot.
right? Like
mean,
how
I
did
remember
that
was
kind of impact your
what people
relationship
don't.
to police? You know,
I mean,
because I feel like that may have been
That's a
part of the
whole-
reaction to you.
man, there's so much things that happened that day. I don't even know where to start. I'm trying to keep it short, but so I remember us going down there, and we were actually getting ready to leave.
Because y'all was supposed to be at the Moriarty Arts Theater so we could talk to the police about police violence. There was a whole event
Yeah,
happening. We
and
was
we
waiting
was
for
just-
y'all, like, where they at?
We was hit last Thursday real quick, was headed there, and then like as we were, I remember I saw Blossom, and she's a singer from Portland. Oh, I ain't seen her in a long time. Woo! And as soon as we hugged, shots rang off. Now I didn't know at the time, but they were close to us. Like bullets could have easily just hit us. You know what I'm saying? But by the grace of God, it didn't. And I was honestly trying to get the hell out of there. I didn't know what was going on, but then I saw Renee had came up to me. It was like, Marcus, this kid got hit.
Who's
I'm like,
Renee?
"Wait, where are they at?
Who's Renee?
Renee, she's a photographer from Portland. We was all there together, me, her, Marcus, and we were meeting a friend, and then all that just happened. All of it just happened. And that's when we heard Marcus, you know, had took the kid to the store. So we're trying to find Marcus. We see him and the kid on the floor. The kid's kind of bleeding out he got hit in the arm, and I believe somewhere in the torso. I may have that off the detail because it's a long time ago. But lo and behold, as we're administering aid, me and him is telling, you know, people to get water. We're trying to apply pressure to the kid's wounds. We're just trying to do what we know. The cop is at the door with his arms folded, making jokes about the kid, as we're the ones as citizens, like, doing the part he should be doing. And that was just really irritating. But when the medics came, they made it, instead of putting the kid on a stretcher, they made him they walked him by his shirt, which that was kind of off to me, but whatever. And then as we were going to leave, I guess they were trying to clear the area or whatever their excuse was, but they were super rude, and someone had pushed Marcus in the back with a gun or something. And we turned around like, what the hell are you doing? Like, we're not gang members. We're not harassing y'all. We're not any of the sort. We came from the situation. You don't even know what's going on. We could better tell you what happened than you assuming what's going on. And that communication just got lost because they wasn't trying to hear it. They were just pressing on us, and guns pulled out on us and circled around us. And long story short, we got arrested. As we were in processing, they took our belts and stuff, pants falling off of us, slamming our hands on the counter and shit. It was like just really trying to check us into obeying authority and stuff. And it wasn't even that deep. Like, we just came from damn near saving a life. Like, what are y'all doing? So again, that goes back to everything we were just talking about with the criminalization of blackness. That's the narrative, that's funding, that gives them an excuse to treat us how they treat us. And that's a prime example of, you know, the process of going through that whole thing from last Thursday to in the car, them lying to us about we're about to get freed, and then we still wind up in handcuffs and not telling us where we're going until we're already downtown. It's like, where do you think you're going? You're not going home. You're going to jail. And it's just like just playing those mental games with us when we really didn't do anything. So it's like that's all a part of that process.
And it's incredible because advocating for people affected by violence like that, you never hear of like white people rendering aid and being like guns on them and stuff like that. It's usual and customary to provide first aid to someone that's harmed, but this is something that consistently happens. You know, like when my nephew got murdered, all I kept thinking about was like, why didn't anybody try to give him first aid? And there was a Marine that did try to do it, and he was only allowed because he was white. He was like, the only reason they even allowed me access to him, and I could have saved his life if they would have got me an AED device out of their cars, but they weren't willing to get us anything to help me start his life up. And so the fact that you don't even allow us, like when you hit the scene and you're gang task force, that means that you know that you're going into a potentially violent situation.
So wait,
You don't have AED
refuse
devices.
They refuse to give the AED.
They didn't allow ambulance access. They don't allow anybody. They did not go and get it out of the car. That's what started me protesting. That's what started me activating and organizing, because I was like, why didn't anybody try to save his life? I spoke to a Marine that said he used his belt as a tourniquet and he could have saved his life. He was asking for this AED device. That's how I started learning about Eddie, you know, the little boy that had the heart attack at school because they didn't have the defibrillator, and his mom. I started realizing, like, oh, so we don't save Black lives? We just let them sit there for 4.5 hours, and then, you know, a couple years later, Mike Brown, same thing. You don't get access, we're going to hold the guns against you, and we're going to let them die. And then when they die, we'll go ahead and remove the body, but you don't have even the right to administer first aid.
It makes me think, too, like you said, you know, what happened with Mike Brown, and it makes me think Jason Washington, too, like
Yeah.
a Marine.
Yeah.
A fight breaks out.
A
He's trying to
Navy.
stop.
He was from the Navy and a
like
post office
and he's
man.
trying to
Okay.
stop the
that one was close,
situation.
too.
He's
Jason
trying to
Washington.
stop the situation, and he ends up killed. And so, like, that
With
rendering,
Tony
being able
Stevenson
to
trying
render
to stop the
aid.
situation, ends up killed. Nobody's helping preserve his life. I mean, all these different, you know.
Sheesh. Man,
Preventable.
I mean,
avoidable,
but there's
unnecessary.
plenty, enough to say there's plenty to protest about.
and so
But-
that brings us to, like, just 2020 in and of itself. Like, because 2020 was, you know, everybody was sitting down for a second. Like, we all sat down, or not everybody,
That
because some
90
people had to go to
days,
work.
that
People had to go to work, you know, but most of the world was sitting down for the first time. And then George Floyd happens. And so, can y'all tell me both individually just how you learned about George Floyd and what your first reaction to him was? Because, like we've been talking about, police killings, police violence is not new, but there was something about this one that felt different.
It was incredible. Here in Portland, we had just finished up like a 4-week trial for Jeremy Christian, who had murdered people on the MAX train and actually stabbed one of our comrades that used to be in the Don't Shoot Portland movement with us. But I had been going to trial for 4 weeks with Demetria Hester and the families affected by the murders. And so it might have been maybe a week after that, that's when the eruptions happened because of the video that the young lady got at the scene of the crime where, you know, Derek Chauvin murdered George Floyd. And it was incredible because I was like, oh, wait, everybody's calling me and talking about, hey, we're going downtown, what's going on? We're going to do this, we're going to do that. And I'm still traumatized from Jeremy Christian cussing me and Demetria out at his sentencing and being allowed to do that. No cuffs on, white supremacists in the room, nobody from our community at all out there with those families except for like us in the media and the white supremacists that was there and the judge. And I'm like, y'all getting ready to protest for Minneapolis? Like, I don't understand. I was confused because I had just witnessed a couple of years ago thousands of people showing up at the MAX train station saying, you know, never again, we gonna be together. And then I just witnessed 4 weeks of these families being humiliated in the courtroom, not only by this white supremacist and his law firm that was in there, but the other white supremacists that was making up space in our community. And so I'm not doing this. I'm not doing this. What do y'all need from me? Because I'm not doing this. In my opinion, it's going to be performative because don't nobody really care about us because I'm out here every day. I'm out here going to court. I'm out here at these hospitals. We paying for funerals. Y'all don't care about nobody. What you going downtown for? You know what I'm saying? That was my thought. That was my, ouch, what is y'all down here for? Why is it getting so loud? What's going on? The only thing that made me respond was when my friend Danielle was like, my daughter Chanel is pregnant and these officers are tear gassing us and they doing this and that. And I was like, wait a minute, what? I said, we're in a pandemic. Why would they be using tear gas if we're not supposed to exasperate because, you know, we could cause this mass COVID? Why would they use tear gas or any kind of use of force against us that's going to make us exasperate. It's going to make you cough. It's going to make you choke. It's going to make you run. It's going to give you like confusion. Like that's not okay. So then I started getting on the call with like, health administrators. And I was like, hey, can you give me a report or something? Because people want me to show up, but I'm not. And I need to be able to show up in a way that creates a barrier against this violence. And so can you help me? And I asked Aria maybe 20, 30 questions about the effects of tear gas against somebody. And my focus was, if we've been sitting in the house for 90 days,
And
we
Aria
haven't
is
had a
Miss
Aria
Black
Mormon,
Oregon at
yes,
that time.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I was like, if we've been sitting in the house for 90 days, 90 to 120 days, and we haven't had exercise, we aren't healthy, we haven't even been in community, everybody doesn't feel good mentally and emotionally, and they're out there being assaulted. What does that look like? And she was like, oh, let me put something together for you. And for days and weeks, we stayed on the phone. And within no time at all, she gave me that report. And that's when I was like, hey, Ashley, check it out. What can we do about this? I see this happening. I'm getting calls, people sending me messages. My inbox is wild. I'm ready to file a lawsuit against these people. Can I pay you some money to stop the violence? Can they just at least stop with the tear gas? Can we get them to stop that? And she said, I don't know. Gave her the report. She was like, oh, yeah, let's figure it out. Judge Hernandez was like, oh, shoot, yeah, with the tear gas coming in here in the federal building, of course we need to do something because we don't have enough information. And this report right here details the people that have been trained in this use, and we know it's not the public at large, so something has to happen. So instead of being down there with the bullhorn and all that other stuff, the banner, we use the science. We use the science.
Yeah.
It was like, let's use what we do know,
So I want to do a quick shout out. I was happy to be able to work on that. I had no idea that it was going to be what it became.
I know you was looking like, what the heck is going on?
Education before action.
Yeah. So Aria Mormon, Zadora Williams, and Anita Randolph, Dr. Anita
the
Randolph.
Secretary of Don't Shoot Portland.
Yeah. So all of us got to work on that, and it took Ted, the mayor, a minute, but eventually, after the wildfire, he banned the tear gas, and then y'all ended up winning.
Well, he
the suit,
didn't
right?
ban it. Our injunction was approved. We had an injunction against the city, and what was he going to do? Violate the injunction like the Trump administration did? No.
So he kind of took credit for it in a way that
well, he tried because it was PR.
Yeah, last mayor, every mayor does, every politician, but that's what they
that
do.
Is what
they
do
take credit.
What's so wild is I was getting
crazy.
interviewed by like CBS News, The Atlantic, Washington Post, all these people about this tear gas report, and he went out one night and got tear gassed, and from that point on, everybody was like, the city of Portland's mayor stopped the tear gas, like, he's protecting officers because they were at risk, and everybody else, like the articles, because I'm getting tags. Like every time something is published about Don't Shoot Portland or any activism here, I get the notifications. And I was like, oh, so Ted did this. I was like, that's wild how, like he's out here and he's so bold and strong and he's taking care of us. Like, the erasure is real.
He's so bold and strong. Like, I mean, the last one did that too. Didn't we? When we was bringing people together to address the mayor and try to figure out some whatever. Didn't he put that in his end of year report or something like that? Like, that's what they do. Like the work that organizations and people that's actually sacrificing towards a better change are trying to do. They won't, like the powers that be, they won't like actually address it, but they'll take credit for the shit later.
Oh, absolutely. We've seen hundreds of millions come through our community because of the response that our community had to the tear gas. And for us, it was just like, see, we do better than you guys. And I was like, y'all literally are on my, that's my work.
That's my word.
That's my work. I did that, and yeah, y'all got it, and you can carry it, and you got the momentum, and you feel healthy, and you ain't getting death calls all day. But yeah, go ahead and do that, because as long as you're doing whatever you need to do to stop the violence, I don't care. It doesn't matter who did it, who triggered it, who said do it. If you got the power to do it, then use your legitimate power to use that leverage and pull that trigger.
All right.
Stop the violence.
I know you got to head out of here in just a second, so I want to make sure.
I think Ty already.
Yeah,
unless she texts you.
She hasn't.
Okay. Yeah, I think she's already on her way.
For you, Glenn, when and where did you first hear about George Floyd, and what was your reaction to?
That part is a little blur, but I just know that I was kind of I was just over seeing that happen over and over again. I heard about the story, but I never actually watched the video until like later.
I've never watched it.
You never watched it?
I don't want to. Yeah.
I mean, I don't blame you, but like for that same reason is why I tried to ignore it. But then it's just like, again, like things just start getting escalating, and I'm getting calls and things are escalating, and now it's like, you know what? Let me see what happened. And then it's just like, to go from seeing what happened on camera, and then for people to just, you know, that section of the country to just lie about his knee not even being where it was, and Candace Owens doing that documentary, and literally lying about everything, and just to see that actually convince people against their own interests. I'm sorry, you could have an opinion against, you know, what's the appropriate way of protesting or whether riots are blah, 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 but you got to keep in mind, from 2014, I know before, but when we got 2014 to it never stopped.
Never, yeah.
George Floyd was just another, not to say it like that, but it's like it never stopped. So of course, after so long, like the population is going to get desensitized from it.
Yeah.
They're going to still be, it's going to be that one that opens up a window of opportunity because it gets that reaction from everybody. And when that window of opportunity is pried open, real like tangible work needs to be done, because after it's closed, people go right back to their lives as they did, right?
As they did.
We never got that George Floyd policy passed. They didn't never pass that.
Right.
And it was
Or
funding in it for the police. Like
We
it
didn't
was,
get Emmett
they
Till.
didn't even listen, and then they twisted the whole defunding the police thing to mean something that it didn't mean. It's just like, again, that is a tactic. That's a playbook. That is a narrative. That is an algorithm. It's all a game.
Yeah, we
So
had
it's like,
leverage. It
leverage.
went from abolish the police to defund the police, and then it was like, we're gonna defund the programs that y'all need.
But that's what, if you don't watch them, that's what they do.
But they'll put a new tag on it. Sometimes they'll say we're defunding this program, but they'll put a different tag.
I remember
on,
the day
on
when I
our
was
stuff.
like, boot the union, defund the police became just defund the police. Don't forget about the union, because the union is going to be the one to work with the city on the city charter to block any kind of ways to the charter and to block all this type of policy and funding from getting to the community. It's like the union is the head of the beast right there. So it's like, whatever reimagining what public safety looks like, all of that is a contract between the police union and the city. So like that could be get addressed. So
And we got assaulted trying to go and testify for collective bargaining agreements.
So I mean, again,
They
as
really
we're
don't
talking,
want
it's
your
just like,
voice on the record.
as much people talk shit about acting, as we're talking, it's more than just being in the streets and yelling into a bullhorn. We're talking about like legislative duty. Like we're talking about like actual mandates and policies, like city statutes. We're talking about charters, the city constitution. Like it's things that can be done to address these things. The priority isn't there, the funding isn't there, the effort isn't there.
But we don't get those Saturdays where everybody just get to come outside and celebrate life together and feel safe.
Yeah.
We don't get those. If we would have showed up, I know if I would have went out there, I'd be getting death threats right now.
Right.
You know, like we don't get those, and y'all know what Saturday I'm talking about, April 5th. Like you, literally the anniversary of the assassination of Dr. King. Y'all wondering why we not out there, because y'all don't care about us when we die, and you don't want to hear nothing that we saying.
Street name. Like, don't give me a street name and not do nothing for my community when I'm gone. Do something for my nieces.
We ain't
do
doing
something
it for
my,
the
like,
name
This
of
is
the
the
street.
this is one of the scariest things to me, is
The cognitive
what George.
dissonance.
We can't go down that one. But George Floyd, you know, it was different in a lot of different ways, but it was part of the same stuff. Because it doesn't really matter how you die. When you die, you die.
When you die, you
you
die.
know, so there's that. But whatever was in all the things that made George Floyd move people, it was different because we had the pandemic.
It was that.
And then we had the video, and so people didn't have much else to do except go out to the streets.
Express
And
themselves.
so that's what's scary to me, is like that was the biggest protest for Black people's lives globally ever. And so when we think about all the names, all the things that we've been talking about this whole time, you know, and now we're here 5 years later, and I already started to see the narrative getting chipped really before the 100 days was up. You know, when Portland was protesting, but it was starting to get chipped, and then they started sledgehammering.
Day
at
one, it was chipped.
You know, and
Day one, it was chipped because remember what I told you, when I got the calls, I was like, why would I do that? They don't care about us. I was literally just at trial for 4 weeks with these families that witnessed people get murdered on the train. I'm looking at the witnesses and everybody
Nazis,
else
like,
for 4 weeks. We got white supremacists all up in our community, Proud Boys outside the courthouse. We got Jeremy Christian cussing and rallying and got a "Don't Tread on Me" flag sitting right on the table where he's defending himself for killing people.
none of this shit matter today if it's just in today, if you don't go home and do something. You know, that was always the message. It wasn't just, again, like...
That's why we'd ask everybody, where was they? What do you do? Where are you from? Do that for the movement. Whatever
Right.
it is, if you're a lawyer, lawyering. If you're a neighbor, start talking to your neighbors like bystander intervention. We literally were practicing and preaching and moving bystander intervention. Yeah, if your police quit. I used to tell people all the time, if you don't lose your job fucking with me, you're not really hard. You're not doing the work. Like, you have to lose your job. Mike Murawski at the art museum. Like, he literally pushed so hard to where he lost his job. You know what I'm saying? There was a couple of different people that knew they wasn't about to be rehired after George Floyd and COVID, because they was like, you helped make this impact by participating or supporting or providing leverage or a platform for these people. And we can't take that back now. They loud, they out here, everybody can see them. There's nothing we can do now. And so it seemed like everybody that had something to do with helping us build a sustainable movement was taken out. You know, on the Super Bowl, he said, subtract one. And they wasn't just black people, they were subtracting all of our allies one by one was being pushed. Even Dr. Anita, shoot, she joined Don't Shoot Portland, helped this thing. They sent her to Minneapolis. You know, like, you got the head of neurology, a triple PhD black woman that just put together this science report that all they know is that people was demeaning her while she was at the press conference, but after that it was Ted, and remember she couldn't believe it. She was like, why are they talking about me like this? Why are they saying I'm stupid? I'm a neurologist, a chemist, and a psychiatrist. Are you serious?
There's
like
always that double speak.
The fact that we were providing something that, and even the lawsuit, all the people that benefited from our lawsuit here locally because of the racism in our state, it happened just like with Mike Brown. When we said, hey, we got a tort claim, they heard us. They was like, yeah, ain't no jury in Oregon about to say that you were harmed. So in 2020, when we spent the $100,000 on the lawsuit, it was white people who won the lawsuits. We had to defend them for showing up for us because we were not defensible. You couldn't defend us. You couldn't, Glenn getting flash banged with his little sister. That's not, you can't go to court and say that the police beat you up. So in 2020, when George Floyd happened, even though we had 6,000 responses, like, we had networks of, ways to get information. We had 6,000 videos, emails, contacts, pictures that we used with our lawsuit to help several people across the country file hundreds of millions of dollars in lawsuits from this tear gas report. In our town, they wasn't black. Because even our civil rights attorneys know that you can't go into a courtroom in this state and say that a black person participating in civil disobedience is somebody that should be protected by the state.
They don't treat you like a domestic terrorist.
Well,
you are.
The
funding says
that. years ago, I was running this workshop, and it was called Music as a Tool for Justice. And one of the people who came to my workshop, she was telling me back in the day, she was in high school. She brought Mr. Kent Ford. Kent Ford is the founder of the Black Panthers, Portland Black Panthers, to her school. And then the next day, she got a visit from the FBI saying, you shouldn't have him coming to your school, da-da-da. Do you know who this man is? But like trying to
come to my school.
Push on her to not do that. And so just like what you're saying, black or like a domestic terrorist, like that's the framing, even though like he will say is like our weapons of mass destruction were bacon and eggs.
We're giving away food and
we're
books.
Giving away food. Like they didn't even do the, marching on the street with the guns like Oakland and stuff like that. So yeah, it's really, if you speak up, you are close to being you're very close to being a threat.
Yeah.
On that, I just wanted to fit this in because I made that joke about like police quitting, but like in 2020, you saw a lot of people starting to come around to positions that Don't Shoot have been advocating for a long time. You know, in particular, like dismantling the police. Can you talk about why it's been so important for you and Don't Shoot to stand in the positions loudly for all these years? And even can you talk about, as you're kind of breaking that down, how you came to that conclusion that the police need to be dismantled? Because that's not something that is like, it gives fear to a lot of people thinking about, even if people have like skepticism around the cops, it's not a position that people are willing to make that next jump.
Yeah, well, when my nephew got murdered and I found out that his life wasn't worth saving and that most of his friends were dead and that all the money going into our community went into community policing partners' pockets, to me, you know, working with CPA all them years, it's racketeering. You're literally getting paid to investigate and interrogate children in their communities and to a terroristic level. That's not any way to run a city, you know, and especially if you're, you know, political, like I would talk to the police. I'd go to these gang task force and they'd be like, yeah, I knew your nephew since he was a little kid. I remember your brother, he used to be out here. And so they had generational relationships within our community. So that means you always everywhere, all the time. And you know these children. And so my thought was that why would you have informants go in here and create circumstances for their children to commit crimes and then be identified and indicted for these crimes and then to be locked up for these crimes or to be murdered because they're participating with these crimes? And our first show that we did here, the Stolen Angels exhibit, I had news articles about children that lived in our community that worked with, you know, Sergeant Pete Simpson at the time and other police in our community through the Boys and Girls Club. And these kids were worked with to produce this show on the History Channel, sponsored by this company called Discovery. They literally paid the Portland police to participate with them in producing a program called Gangland. And not only was my nephew in it.
Wait, what?
Yeah,
They
not only was
produced
my
that
nephew
episode?
and all
Oh
them
my
other kids in it, but they used the, you know, cover their voices, got the little faces, told them to use fake names like homicide and other stuff like that. And I found out that the parents didn't even know about it till their kids was getting the calls from the producers telling them, hey, I got your $50 gift card or whatever. But check this out, all them kids dead now, including my nephew. So if your participation with the Boys and Girls Club, the education system, the health department, and the police is gonna get the children murdered because the interactions, and these is kids, like I would never ask no kid about no informants or gang members in their community, because I'm not gonna just think that because you're brown, you know the criminals. And these are the things that were being told to me. Not only did I understand what happened in my family and in my community, but when you got kids saying, oh, they had 100 officers come to Jefferson High School to have breakfast with us, and we all got to wear t-shirts, and the mayor and everybody was there, and they're asking us, who are the gang members in your neighborhood? Who are the bad guys in your neighborhood? You're talking to 13-year-olds and 15-year-olds and 17-year-olds, and you're thinking that because they're brown people, that they actually know gang members. The kids are telling you they don't know people, but you're interrogating them at breakfast, and they're supposed to be honored. That is the problem. That shouldn't happen in anybody's community. And if it's happening to a community that can't defend itself and will not be defended by anybody else, then that has to stop. And if the practice is politicians utilizing the use of force by the police officers or using them as an authority to help them get where they need to go or keep people quiet or keep people out of the way, that is the problem. And I had that talk with officers. They was like, well, we just doing what we're supposed to do. Then you need to tell them to stop calling us for this and that. You need to tell them to da-da-da-da. I was like, I'm gonna tell all y'all to stop. We're about to shut all this down. And that's literally where it went. Because I was like, oh, these mechanisms that could be used for other things. Like, people are not inherently violent just because they brown. Why are we funding that? It's inappropriate. It's terroristic.
And it's other
now,
ways to generate revenue
but,
other than doing that.
But
man.
look, but
That's all
now
you're doing.
the same thing exists right now, right? Under a Trump president. Everybody's worried about it. We have been living that reality.
Nothing new.
So now let's see how everybody else deals with that, because we've done every single thing that we can do.
Yeah.
There's nothing we could say different.
I just, you know, in one of my essays, I had to cut this, but I saw it on Instagram in 2020, and it never leaves my mind. And it goes back to what I was saying about time. People thinking that time alone is like proof of progress. But Harriet Tubman was alive at the same time as Thomas Jefferson and Ronald Reagan.
Yep.
And then Ronald Reagan, this is what I had to cut from my essay, but Ronald Reagan ran on "Let's Make America Great Again." And where are we at? Mm-hmm. And so people think that time alone means that a whole lot has changed,
America
but
First is a
morphing happens. A lot of morphing happens, but that doesn't mean that change, like on the deep levels, has. And so it's crazy. And you, in particular, you know, we talk about, America talks a lot about MLK as the evidence of progress. And MLK was pushing that line, and so were all the organizers around him. But the way he's taught as a figurehead is not the reality of where he really is. Just as we're starting to close out here, can you talk about MLK's influence on both y'all's work, and how y'all would see his analysis of where we're at today?
I mean, I was born on his birthday, so I guess. But really, the MLK I'm particularly familiar with ain't the mainstream MLK. It's like towards the end when he was talking about how he felt like he walked us into a burning house and his dream was actually a nightmare. Because again, you could have equality, but you don't have equity, you don't have ownership, you don't have like inherent human right, like that's being violated. So that part, when he moved more towards human rights and addressing the Vietnam War and where Malcolm arrived at, where he went to Mecca and then he realized something different and then he came back and they were kind of moving towards that same, that's more the influence of, you know, I took from MLK, is that pathology. And that led into, you know, what Bobby Seale was doing with the Black Panthers, like his mindset. So it's like those three, I would say the human rights message and the recognizing the disenfranchisement and what they were telling, what white America was doing for themselves as far as using, like they, you know, public housing was for white America first. Like they used all that funding and federal funding to teach themselves how to agriculture and farming and all that. And at the same time telling us to pull ourselves up from our bootstraps without doing any of what they did for themselves. So it's like, that's the type of messaging that MLK had when I was studying him and what I drew from him. And, you know, that's where I landed with him.
Yeah. And I landed seeing him with the children, you know, knowing I grew up I was at Dr. King's school. I was at King's school, 5th grade, class president.
I wasn't that, though.
When I became an activist, well, I was also in the spelling bee that year, so I had my little, you know. But I've always looked at the opportunity for the children. If they have the knowledge of what's happening, they don't have to wait till something bad happens to them to speak out about it. They can actually live deliberate lives that have social value for themselves, and they can help use that leverage of confidence to make a better world. Like they can not be tolerant of racism, but they can identify it when it's happening, and they can utilize their own confidence to shut it down, like to put it where it belongs. I remember when I first came home, my brother used to be like, Tressa, you out here talking to these white people crazy, like you don't understand, they gonna get you like they did Pac, they gonna do, you know, you gonna get done, like you can't be out here doing that. And I was like, no, it needs to become normal for them to hear people talk like this. Like the fact that y'all tolerate it and you allow people to devalue who you are or your voice, or you wait till somebody allows you to speak on the record. I'm not waiting for shit because I can't get back anything that's been taken from me. And the only thing that I want is my nephew back. And if I can't have him, everybody about to know it and it's about to be a problem. And the best thing that I could do is make sure that every child that's growing up in our community knows how much they're valued, how much they're worth, and that they know how to get whatever they need without asking the system for it. Like, don't go to your teacher or your, you know, none of those people. You can do what you want to do. And that's why, you know, But Dr. King, people don't realize like 400 kids went to jail. You know, he was out there marching with the children because the parents and the leaders and the pastors wouldn't march with him. They was talking negative about him. But those same children ended up being the John Lewises, you know? Those same children ended up being the same people that we know right now that actually still have integrity and are using their voices to push the movement. And that's what I want to see. It might not happen in our lifetime, but if we impart value to our children now and let them know they're not the problem, like all these things that exist to say that we are bad people because we're black or because we're poor, if they get that alternate information, like with the books I gave Glenn, I gave him 2 Faith Ringolds and a Fannie Lou Hamer, you know, so that the kids could learn about Rosa Parks, Harriet Tubman, and Fannie Lou Hamer. Not that they died or that they was treated bad, but that they actually had courage and that they were inspired to speak. That's what we need to put into our children, because we should never be quiet about things that are not okay.
And for that very same reason, everything she just said is the exact same reason that DEI is used to remove that from education
Absolutely.
and in policy. They don't want the kids to have representation and, you know, getting taught empowerment and all that. Like, no, that's the reason.
I remember my uncle, he went to MLK, Martin Luther King, when it was Highland. And I remember he told me when I was in high school, he said, I remember they were having this career day. And they asked him, what do you want to be? And he said, oh, I think I might want to grow up and be a police officer, or I might want to do this. And they was like, well, maybe something more realistic. Maybe you could be a janitor, or, you know, you could go and work for the Army or something like that. And he did. He went to the military thinking, oh, that might be something. That might help me. And ever since then, his life been downhill. And that was back in, you know, Vietnam. But it's like the alternate, like you literally, I want to be a teacher. Nah, you could be you garbage man, you know. I want to be a lawyer. No, you might be, you know, you might want to do this. Like, no, we never want this generation to feel like they could be something outside of what they dream.
Yeah, and imagine what that embeds into a child. You're targeting economic mobility of a population. That population is going to have kids.
They're not smart enough, too.
Yeah, they're not smart enough, they're not good enough, or they're inherently just, it's not for you. What do you think they're going to teach your kids? You know, that's going to be embedded. That creates trauma in and of itself, because how do you think they're going to beat that into their kids? So it's like, that's again, I keep saying it, but that's like an algorithm that we need to break. That's something we need to break.
And it takes all of us.
Yep.
So I got 2 more questions for y'all. 5 years later, from 2020, what's been the hardest transition from 2020 into where we're at today?
As far as what?
Generally, whether that's since the pandemic, since the protests, what's been the hardest from that time period into where we're at today?
Knowing what was going to happen.
Yeah, honestly, because it's like seeing a car wreck happen. You're like, hey, this A is going to hit B, and then C is going to be, and you're saying it over and over and over and over and over again, and everyone is ignoring it. And then when it happens, everyone's just like running around with a chicken head with their head cut off. And it's just like, but that's preventable. I'm kind of desensitized from it at this point, honestly, me personally.
Like, we could all be anti-fascists.
We all, yeah, you know? And it's just, again, quit letting them people control language and manipulate language and tell you what words mean. Google's free, ChatGPT is free, YouTube is free, Twitter costs. Hello?
Blue Sky Social.
Like, come on, man.
Yeah.
Like, we have free speech. It ain't, you know, it don't cost for speech yet. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not illegal to think for yourself yet.
But
But it's coming. So it's like, you know, apply yourself. That's all it comes down to.
I think just the fact that there was so much unity and there was so much outpouring of community because this man had died. And not even, I don't think that it was the fact that he had been murdered, and I don't believe that it was the fact that he had been murdered and it was on video. I think it was the fact that platforming his murder and what happened to him and the outrage that we all felt was a way to get rid of Donald Trump the first time. And I think that we were short-sighted because it was like, how do we get rid of him? He's not the one who created racism in America. It's always existed here. We came here on some genocide shit, right? So the fact that he was there, if the only goal we had was to remove him, one person, and not fascism, not discrimination, racism, and terrorism, that's where we're still there. I knew, I was like, okay, he's not going to be here. Okay, everybody wants to get him out of here. November, he's supposed to, no longer be the president. We know January 6th happened. He said, I ain't going, but he had to go. But I knew he was coming back. We knew he was coming back. It was like, okay, he's going to be back. Let's start organizing around what's going to happen. And I knew it was going every 4 years. I remember even telling people, so y'all know this happens every 4 years, right? And we only do it to get rid of people and to get new people in. And we still do the same thing over and over again. We don't trust each other enough to be consistent. And that's the problem. So now we are destabilized now because he's Trump again and he's the president and he's vindictive and he's upset about everything that happened and the humiliation of it all. And we all here trying to figure out how to go the right way without just breaking the entire system down. It's like a joke. It's literally a joke because he's laughing at us. He got Elon up there with chainsaws and kids pulling boogers out their nose. Like, this is ridiculous. And it's like a joke. He's like, look at y'all. And then laughing like, oh, look at the snowflakes and the libtards and all this other stuff. And it's like, y'all allowed him to do this. Like, we literally had each other's back. It was racism that allowed him to come back because you wanted to protect your privilege rather than have unity. You didn't really believe in intersection. You thought you could use our necks to step up, like how Derek Chauvin did with George Floyd. That's not how this world works. If my neck break, we all break.
So on that, I want to end with this because I brought y'all two together specifically for a reason. So Glenn, I just want you to say, what is the biggest thing that you've learned from Teressa?
Oh, I mean, just learning how city government works, like the whole everything with the system, like learning where to apply yourself, how to apply yourself. I already had the empathy for children part, but just learning how to advocate for your community is the most essential lesson I think I've ever learned from Teressa. Like knowing how to advocate, you could take that to so many different directions and have so much influence on somebody. It may not even be me. It's having that influence on other people and so many different other people, and then that influence bleeds into that part right there is probably the most essential thing I've ever learned from her.
Teressa, what's the biggest thing you've learned from Glenn?
Well, so Glenn's birthday and my dad's birthday are the same days. And I learned how to listen to black men with Glenn. Him knowing how the world treats all of us, and especially how they treat our children when they're murdered, how, they used to have the mug shots of the victim on the screen to, justify the murder that happened to him and everything else. Having a living person that's witnessed not only death in their family, not only police violence in their community, not only the violence that was about to happen to him and Marcus when they were rendering first aid, but to have the opportunity to hear his voice and to hear him sustain the movement through his voice, through his actions, through his experiences, that is a gift because we're burying people like that. You know what I'm saying? And we're never hearing from them. They're not growing up. They're not turning into men. They're not taking care of their nieces. They're not standing up for their community because they're not surviving what's happening to us. And so the fact that I got to listen to him, I got to watch him. I remember before we even started protesting, we was at No Limit Stickers, and I was talking to him about what I was witnessing. My nephew, I don't even think he was dead yet. My nephew hadn't even died. I was just home visiting, and I saw all the inequities. You had to go into No Limit Stickers, and Maxwell had to be there to greet you because you can't have a black person in a store on Alberta. That was astonishing to me because when I left here, Alberta was filled with black businesses. When I came back, the black businesses that existed had to have a white person be the person doing business in their community. Yeah. And witnessing how that affected our community and our outcomes and our opportunities and everything else, and just being able to kind of continue the conversation, okay, so we're gonna move, we're gonna talk, we're gonna motivate, we're gonna support, and to watch it happen in real time. We here 15 years later. You know what I'm saying? We've established the momentum and we put down the record, and anybody can track it and do whatever they need to do with it. And that to me is magic because we didn't have nothing. We always talk about make $1 out of 15 cents. This is the one.
Well, on that note, I appreciate y'all both making the time to come and speak about all of this. It's crazy kind of reliving all of these things and what brought us here 15 years later, like you just said. We're going to move into Glenn performing your song, Willie Lynchings. You released that song in 2020. You just talk about the record, but art is also just as much a part of the historical record as journalism or anything that we put on paper. So can you talk about the inspiration behind Strange Fruit and why, or I call it Strange Fruit, Willie Lynchings, but it was inspired by Strange Fruit, and why you released it in 2020 before we have you perform this song?
For the same reasons that I wrote Asada, like just the documentation of right now is very important because a lot of like artists aren't really on that wavelength as far as documenting what's happening in the streets, and I think bringing that authenticity of actually being there and being able to speak on that rather than just being on the outside and kind of just speaking on what you're seeing on the TV, that's different. So I think that Willie Lynchings is a very authentic song, is a very honest song. I think that I like to put what I've learned from Teressa, what I've learned from activism, what I've learned from community organizing, what I experienced, what I think, all of that into a boiling pot and articulate it into a piece of art, And Willie Lynchings is his own walking message, that could be applied to any type of oppression. So.
All right, well, we're going to get into Willie Lynchings. Thank y'all again for this conversation.